What is the difference between Amazon Seller Central and Amazon Vendor Central? What are the pros and cons of each? And is it possible to use the two together? Keep watching to find out. In today's episode of E-Commerce Heroes, I'll be talking about Amazon Seller Central versus Amazon Vendor Central with Rich Hurtley and Matt Ferguson, the directors of eManaged and Rich Insight. This month's videos are sponsored by Inform.co, the new name for AppEagle, who provide analytics and repricing tools for Amazon sellers. So Rich, let's start at the very beginning. Would you be able to tell us the difference between Amazon Seller Central and Amazon Vendor Central?
So Amazon Vendor Central is very much selling to Amazon. So it's a wholesale model or a first-party model. And you sell in effect to a buyer and they decide what range they purchase. Obviously, you negotiate with them on price and on terms. So often it's sort of 60 to 90-day payment terms, 50 to 65% discount, sometimes more, sometimes less, depending on the category. And obviously you set up the trading price on the site. So that's actually the buyer who does that rather than you as a brand. But you deliver to them in bulk as a brand rather than kind of B2C, as it were. They then reorder with your warehouse on POs, which they obviously purchase orders, which they send you. And they're responsible for the customer fulfillment, customer service, etc. You still often have to list your items through Vendor Central, so you still have to actually physically put your product on the back end of Amazon, but it's just a slightly sort of different process to on Seller Central. And most importantly, Amazon are the seller of record, so Amazon are the ones who are transacting with the customer on that sale, and they own the stock, as it were. So and then on Seller Central, that's when you're selling on Amazon or through Amazon rather than to them, and that's a marketplace model or a third-party model. So you list your items through Seller Central. You decide obviously the trading price, so the price it's listed at, and the range that you're actually wanting to list, and obviously the stock depth you're looking to list within that. And obviously you pay Amazon a commission for this. So it's a fixed rate that you pay, usually around 15%, depending on the category. And you're responsible for customer service, for delivery. But obviously you can use FBA or Fulfillment by Amazon, which is Amazon's fulfillment solution, which enables you to still get the Prime badge, still get competitive rates of delivery. And there's sort of various advantages that can give you, and it makes it a bit easier to launch for some brands. But you as a brand would still be the seller of record on that sale.
Okay, so diving in a little bit deeper, Matt, we've heard a lot recently about the direct-to-consumer or D2C trend in the industry. And what is that, and how does it relate to Seller Central and Vendor Central?
Long story short, the industry is moving increasingly towards direct-to-consumer. It's now easier to sell a product directly to the buyer than it ever was before, with minimal upfront investment or infrastructure. And the way marketplaces are leveraging this for sellers is really changing the industry as a whole. What we've seen over the last few years in particular is suppliers coming to us, coming to our agency, I should say, and asking how they can essentially hide themselves and start selling direct to consumers, and indeed how even brands and manufacturers are now coming to us and are looking for a way to sell direct to consumer, because they now see that they don't need the middleman network that they once did to get plugged in and to get forward facing in front of buyers. Obviously, Seller Central and Vendor are two very different models. What we're seeing at the moment, at least from our current perspective, is that there's increasingly a shift from vendor to seller, because the technology and the ease to sell direct to consumer is there in a way that it never has been before. And the vendor model, which is more of a wholesale model, simply doesn't offer the same kind of control and ability, let alone margin.
And just for some context for our readers there, Rich, would you just be able to give us a brief overview of the pros and cons of both Vendor Central and Seller Central?
I think the key thing that Vendor Central offers that you can't get on Seller Central is forward orders. So depending on the seasonality of your stock, you can get Amazon to commit up front in advance on orders. So before you actually place an order with a manufacturer, with the factory, I should say, you actually have a commitment from Amazon, similar to many other sort of wholesale accounts, which is a big perk if you're obviously reliant on forward order business. Although that model is shifting quite a lot, I think, at the moment in the industry. Obviously, guaranteed sales, you know what the number is, and sales guys like to know what they're definitely going to get on their budget. So there's an element of reassurance there, and often it's obviously growing year on year because Amazon is growing year on year. So it's quite nice and dependable in that respect. I guess you also have good visibility on the platform. So because you are being run by Amazon themselves, there's various advantages. They have various things like SVS and SVS Lite, which is strategic vendor services, which can offer you some good reporting and some specialist resource within Amazon, which some brands benefit from. I think the advantages of Seller Central, I think on the flip side, are around pricing is a major one. I think the fact that you can control what you're selling for, and that comes with a caveat, right? So if you're already selling to an expansive reseller network, you can't control the price of other people and control what is necessarily winning the buy box, as it were. But what you can do is control what you're selling your item for. So you could use Amazon to either price establish, or you could use it to try and get velocity of sales and discount, or you might have no one else selling on your listing, in which case you'll have the buy box irregardless. So that's kind of something brands obviously like to be able to decide depending on where seasonality, promotions, markdown, where they want to go, rather than being told or led by someone else who decides. Obviously, full control on range is key. So if a buyer doesn't want to stock 100% of your range or 80% of your range or whatever it is that's optimal for you, or they're buying the wrong stock, then clearly that isn't ideal for you as a brand. So having control of what you list is critical and a massive advantage.
And interestingly, earlier on, Matt, in Rich's answer there, he mentioned the hybrid kind of approach of using both. So in your opinion, is it possible to use Seller Central and Vendor Central? And if so, are there any advantages to doing this?
It's certainly possible. There's nothing legally stopping you, operationally stopping you. There are some advantages, absolutely. I think a lot of sellers actually don't fully appreciate that Vendor Central and Seller Central are two very different separate entities in Amazon, and they're very different business models. As we've already explained, Seller Central is a marketplace direct to consumer. Vendor Central is a wholesale opportunity. There's a few advantages in having both accounts. A vendor account affords you the ability to control the product listing data in a way that Seller Central does not, at least not as easily. So the ability to make changes to the product record in Vendor Central are fast-tracked in a way that in Seller Central it's a bit more cumbersome. You've also got, obviously, a relationship with a different part of Amazon, which affords you some marketing potentials, and some ability to drive sales and extra revenue through that activity, which can actually complement your Seller Central activities as well. Because from a user's experience, it's one brand, it's all the same items, but obviously if a portion of your items are on vendor, they're going to be given a certain level of care and traffic that on seller they may not have, because you're working with vendor, and vendor is now incentivized, Amazon themselves are now incentivized to sell your product at a high velocity. I think what's important, however, is that a lot of sellers muddy these two topics up, and they go in with half a strategy. That can prove cumbersome, and that can also prove to damage a brand's ability to claw back some control over time. Certainly, there have been a number of instances we've seen over the years where a seller engages in one of them heavily, potentially vendor, let's say, and they get very far down the rabbit hole in vendor. When they reach a point where they'd like to start engaging seller and maybe claw back some of the control around price and brand and maybe just the overall experience, they find it's quite hard to pull back on that relationship. So entering into a seller model where you're leveraging both requires a strategy. That strategy might be different depending on the type of seller you are, and obviously your goals, your business model. If you are interested in leveraging and expanding a B2B model where you are essentially a wholesaler and distributor, maybe it's good to continue to expand in vendor. If you, on the other hand, are more interested in growing a direct-to-consumer model, maybe it's better to expand on seller. It's always advantageous to have both, but the key is to have a good strategy in place to be able to use them and leverage them effectively. Otherwise, you can get into trouble, both from a buyer experience, but also from a branding experience.
Okay, so if we take a step backwards and we look at the whole trend of brands selling directly to consumers, Rich, does this mean that in the future there won't be a need for retailers and that online everyone will just simply buy directly from manufacturers?
Yeah, I mean, so my background actually, I ran a brand that was it was a multi-channel brand. We had like 120 stockists. We had our own retail stores. We had a big online sort of business, and we moved into marketplaces as well. So kind of like I think there is. So I think I've got an interesting perspective when it comes to kind of how different channels can play a role for you as a business. You know, my view is that, you know, there always will be a place for retailers. I genuinely believe that. I think there's a bit of an identity crisis that currently is existing in some retailers, and there's definitely some losers at the moment, but there's also winners. So I think, and it's good to kind of maybe look a little bit deeper as to who's winning and losing. I think where brands are embracing technology or focusing specifically on a niche that's hard to replicate online, I think there's definitely people that are winning. And I think you can see that. I think when people are not adapting, they're trying to play to other channels' strengths, like stuff like trying to compete with Amazon on experience. Customer convenience is going to be very difficult unless you're using an offline bit of leverage that's going to be set you apart. So I think that's kind of one sort of element. And then just some of them are just not leveraging their channel advantages enough. And I think that's really what people have got to do, sort of almost put themselves in a position which is like, what is my USP and how do I stand out and how do I differentiate myself? Because those are the elements that, you know, customers will come to you for. If you're just trying to have a large amount of inventory and trying to offer a great service to customers, you're always going to become unstuck against someone like Amazon or an eBay or the bigger marketplaces, which with far more traction already. So I think if you're going to be David against Goliath, you need a strategy and you need an approach and a place to stand out.
So Rich, I'll just stop you there. Why is it that you think marketplaces will become so prevalent?
I think for online retailers themselves, like being able to offer a marketplace means that you can get additional inventory at minimal risk to no risk. So I think that is a major reason why I think we're going to see more retailers shifting to marketplaces. And we're already seeing this to a degree with that El Cordon Bleu, with Galeries Lafayette, with Harvey Nichols in the UK, and with multiple sort of US department stores as well. People are kind of moving into marketplaces through platforms like Miracle, where they can actually access that sort of technology. So I think that's definitely a transition. I think the marketplaces and retailers are not necessarily two separate things. They might be different business models in the same business.
So what can businesses start doing now to prepare for the future that Richard has just described?
I think, well, Rich made a lot of good points, and I think one of the key points there is adaptation. I guess over the course of the years, there's definitely success stories and there's failures. And success stories always tend to be brands and manufacturers and suppliers and retailers that embrace adaptation. They embrace change. They are not scared of it. They adapt their business model, their ways of thinking, their long-term growth, their plans for the next few years around embracing those changes in the industry. And those changes are happening very fast. Every single year, those changes are happening. They're moving at lightning speed, and they're going to continue to do so by all intents and purposes. So embracing that change and not fearing it is extremely important. Some of the best success stories I've seen on marketplaces are people who didn't come in wanting to force an equation. They didn't come in thinking, this is my brand, this is my price point, this is who I must be, the marketplace must make this successful. They came in with a flexible, open-ended agenda. This is what I'm selling, this is how I think I want to sell it, but based on the leverage that the marketplace is giving me, opening me up to all of these buyers and all of these different regions, but also putting me against all of my competition. I now need to adapt. I need to find my footing, engage in some of those niche ideas, and think about what I want to achieve in this endeavor. Certainly the most successful marketplace sellers are the ones that adapt change. I think the second key aspect of all of this is scale. if you're doing manual processes to support all of this, and every single channel is a custom integration, and you're running it all by generating files every day, and you've got someone who's copying and pasting stuff all over the place to support your orders, obviously you don't have the scale to leverage what the marketplace is bringing to you. If we're talking about 450 marketplaces all over the world right now, that's 450 buyer sets, that's different profiles, that's different regions, different requirements. You need to aggregate all of this, and you need to make it as streamlined as possible so that when you add 20 new channels and 5 new regions, you're not duplicating your workload or increasing your overhead massively. And a lot of sellers just haven't realized that there is so much useful technology out there, and so many insights and ways of doing things that produce a level of scale efficiency that allows them to connect across the world with really very minimal increases in investment, or one-time increases. Once they've got that infrastructure in place, then they can tax on 20, 50, 100 channels, and it really doesn't increase their overhead. It's just a whole new revenue stream tapping into a whole new audience. And that's powerful, to be able to tap into a whole new audience by just connecting to one marketplace, to get perspective on what that market actually thinks of your product and your brand and how competitive you are, is very powerful. And it's very easy to do it now and let the market give you those insights, whereas I think a traditional way of thinking might have been, let's do a 6-month analysis of that market and see where we go. Quite frankly, you just don't need to do that anymore. With a little bit of upfront investment and planning, you can tap into that market and have the market tell you exactly where you stand in it, and then react accordingly, adapt.
Well, Matt, Rich, thank you very much for joining me. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for today. I'd like to say a big thank you to this month's video sponsor, Inform.co, formerly AppEagle, who provide repricing and analytics tools for Amazon sellers. I'd also like to thank everybody for watching. We'll see you again soon for another episode of E-Commerce Heroes here at Web Retailer.